or its management. This is AM 620 WSNR, Jersey City. Competitive prices. All of our clients are.
Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi Sai. This is Yehud 11. The program is 11 at 11. Heard each and every Thursday night, Leil Shishi, cataloging both the decline, the moral decline of our situation, as well as trying to highlight Divrei Torah and Divrei Hashkafa in light and following the pathways of the Gedolim of yesteryear. For those of you who have been listening, the last few weeks have been rather difficult weeks for the Levin family in that we lost on Achron Shel Pesach and Dumdume Chama, my mother, Masha Bas Yisrael, Hareini Kapars Mishkava Zechreinu Levracha, and around 10 days later, on the Shabbos of Rosh Chodesh Iyar, at Shas Raiva Doraiva Milcha time, my father, Rabbi Avraham ben Yeshayahu Halevi Hareini Kapars Mishkava Zechreinu Levracha. Nevertheless, Oides Hashem B'chol Levav, for those who have been listening, we in our family, for a variety of reasons, have been zeicher to see the light, the silver lining, if one could say so, in such an epic tragedy. Ki avi v'imi yasfuni v'Hashem asveni, Hashem yasveni. In other words, some of the things that I've said, I will be repeating, but I believe they're worth repeating for many reasons. First of all, different people listen at different times. And second of all, it's a chizik. And if something good happens, or if we can perceive something good, because as the Pasuk in Eicha says, does Hashem do something bad? Ultimately, Hashem does not do bad. Hashem does good. Sometimes it's much, much harder to see the good, but it's good nevertheless. And therefore, when somebody does something to you good, you don't just say it one time and then go weiter. The inyan of Haida'ah is the reason for the creation of the world, as the Ramban says in the end of Parshas Bo, the epic, the mega Ramban that speaks about the purpose of the world and says, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem has nothing in this world except that people should gather in Batei Knesiyos and Batei Midrashos and say, Noidu Lishmai Ulefarsam Elikusoi, to give him thanks and to be mefarsam, to publicize his godliness and all that he does. And to make that, by doing that publicly, the concept is publicly, it causes that other people should be able to understand, experience, and grow as well. The simple point is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not need our gratitude. He designs it that gratitude is an essential, a quintessential part of our makeup, to such an extent that our nam de plume, that our alter ego identity, so to speak, is Jews of giving thanks. And I may have said this in another recording, and I would commend people that if they have time and they're at home, although the first week when I spoke about my mother, unfortunately I had a problem, a technical problem, so it's not on YouTube. I think I have from the station the 1 hour audio, which I have not been able to transfer to anything, so it's not accessible. But the following week's program, as well as another video that I made, are available on my YouTube channel, 1111. And Baruch Hashem, some people have heard it. It hasn't gone very wide, but the people who have heard it have been somewhat inspired. And anybody who wants to listen, again, I might be repeating some of the things that I said, but nevertheless, I believe it's worthwhile. So by giving thanks, what we do, this is a chesed in itself, because to give thanks, you have to, if it's not just a sugar delusion, if it's not just thank you, like you tell a little child to say thank you. So at the beginning, the child says it like a robot, like an automaton. But eventually, as the child gets over, he internalizes what he's saying and why he's saying it. And he connects his brain to his mouth. And then he begins to perceive the thank you. And the more mature a person gets, the deeper and the more comprehensive the thank you is, and the more impacts on the person as he grows up and as he matures. A person could say thank you to a life's partner for all kinds of things. And if the people are mature, when they say that, they understand the profundity and the comprehensiveness of what they're giving thanks. By the way, parenthetically, my father always used to say, thank you, it's a delicious meal. He would constantly, thank you was on his lips. I would like to talk a little about my parents. And I had this situation where on Sunday, we had our second family Zoom. We had one after my mother was in the terrace during the Shiva. It was around 38 different locations with various people at different locations in Florida, in Lakewood, in Eretz Yisrael, and in New York. And I found it to be extremely therapeutic. And I would advise people who never have lost loved ones that if they do this and they have the older generations on the Zoom, especially the Einiklach, L'man Yedu Dar Seichem, that all of the Einiklach, mostly, they only know their parents, their grandparents rather, at a senior citizen stage. So they look at them as old people, and as young children, and even as teenagers, or even as young adults, they don't relate to the full vibrancy, the dynamism, and the multicolored aspects and facets of the personality of the grandparents. And therefore, the truth is, it's too late now in a certain way, but the truth is that for those who have grandparents, it's so important that they question their parents about their grandparents, and that parents, b'toich chayim shel the grandparents, tell their children about how they recall their father and mother at a younger stage in life, and to fill in the grandchildren on the accomplishments and on the uniqueness of the personalities of their grandparents, which will enhance the gefühl, the feeling of the grandchildren towards the grandparents. And it's really important, not just on Leil Pesach or Leil Seder, but it's important all year round for grandchildren to hear the question, that they should understand what it was like in America in earlier years for the increasingly departing generation of Holocaust survivors. The ones who survived now mostly were young, very, very young at the time of the Holocaust. But nevertheless, it's very, very important. And it forges bonds, and it gives an opportunity for the grandchildren to respect the grandparents that much more and accord them the derech eretz and the attention that they deserve. So here's my nephew in Eretz Yisrael, and he says on the Zoom in his Israeli accented English, I'm a little embarrassed to say, but at the Levaya, he was at the Kavura of both parents, who was zeicher to be buried at the same time in the same place. He says, I felt almost there was like some happiness at the Levaya. Who ever heard of such a thing as to be happy? And I told him that he's absolutely right. And it's really a chazal. This is not Yehuda Levin or anybody else speaking. It's really a chazal. The most widely used parable or allegory which the chazal used to address the attitudinally correct way to view a departure from this world is with the mashal of a ship that's leaving for a transatlantic voyage. And when it's leaving, there's a great amount of trepidation and uncertainty. The ship is loaded with many thousands of dollars worth of cargo. There's a full crew, but nobody knows what's in store for the ship on the many weeks or even months to traverse the Atlantic. Will they make it? Will they make it intact? Will all the people survive? Will the cargo survive? Will it be financially successful, etc.? However, when the ship arrives at the other location, at the other side of the Atlantic, then there's a simcha, because the crew is intact, the ship has arrived, everything is beseder, and the profits are being made. Then there's a true simcha. I believe that this medrash says that this is pshat in the posuk. Toiv yom had maves mi yom hivoldai. The day a person departs this world is greater, it's more good than the day a person arrives, because when a child comes into the world, and there we see a simcha, everybody has a child, it's a big simcha, internationally, intercommunally, but we really don't know what the future of the child will be, how he will grow up, what his hanhagas and midas will be. Will he successfully withstand the vicissitudes of life, the challenges and the yitzhar hara, etc. But when he arrives safely at the other side, and therefore I had this feeling, and many in my family had this feeling with regard to my parents, Aleim HaShalom, Areni Kaparas Mishkavim, job well done, job well done. Now it's much harder, and I could be less of a knaka when to give consolation to the many people who've lost loved ones in the prime of their lives, leaving Yisayim and Almonis, and sometimes Almoinim. It's harder to say this to them, but l'chol hapachas, those of us whose relatives passed away, seva toiva, so to speak, in an old age, they should certainly be able to have this feeling. And kafir the madrega, even in the younger cases, we should understand that ultimately HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing for the good, and that these people are taken away in the middle of a magefa, and they have a special status, a kadoshim-like status, and they will certainly be advocates not only for themselves, but Lilkei P'Shoshanim, Hashem has taken the roses of Klal Yisrael, and definitely they will advocate for Klal Yisrael as well, and they will get credit for that. There's a concept that we all are familiar with. Yesh koin ha'olam b'shah achas. Yesh koin ha'olam b'shah achas, the famous story of the person who was a tremendous Avarian, and he turned it around in a moment of tshuva. He realized, Ein hadavar toli eli bi. He asked, so to speak, allegorically or otherwise, he asked the sun, the moon, the stars, the mountains. He asked for all kinds of intermediaries to petition Hashem on his behalf, and he realized it's up to him. And he passed away from crying and doing tshuva. And a baskol went out and said, he's muchen la'olam haba. And Bacha Rebbe Hanasi, the redactor of the Mishnah, cried and said, Yesh kan ha'olam b'shah achas. So I don't know. I suspect it's possible that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives all of us, maybe, a Yesh kan ha'olam b'shah achas opportunity. Whether he gives it once in life, or he gives it at various stages of lives, I certainly don't know. We need to speak to a great Baal Hashkafa to tell us his opinions on this, or a great Baal Musa. But one thing I do know, that the Yesh Koina Olamai B'Shah Achas moment for my father occurred, as I mentioned previously, it occurred when he was 14, in that fateful day, which formed the destiny, not only of my father, Hareini Kaparas Mishkav Zichron Levracha, but it formed the destiny so far of many tens of descendants, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and many, many hundreds or more of Talmidim who were impacted upon by my father. And it all comes to a point. It all started, it's like an arrowhead. At the point, it's very small, it's very directed, but it broadens as you go towards the arrows, like a triangle in reverse, where it spreads out and it spreads out. At that moment, in that small town, where that shochet suggested to my Zayda, echoing probably what he had already heard from my Babi Aleh Shalom, to send my father to Yeshiva in New York at a time where I don't know if there were 200 or 100 students rather, Talmidim who were coming, or much more than that, who were coming to New York in late 1941 to go to Yeshiva. It was a miyut of a miyut. And for a 14-year-old boy to make a decision, Lech lecha me'artzecha, u'mimeladetcha, u'mibeis avicha, ala oretz asher areka, to a far in New York, it wasn't as close to Pennsylvania as it is today. It wasn't so much that every day people were traveling from Pennsylvania to New York, from Pittston and Hazleton or wherever it was there. And he said unstintingly yes. And he was all alone. And there was not too much money there at all. I don't know how much money his parents gave him. I never questioned him on this. There's so many questions, of course, we'd like to ask now. And now he's not here anymore to ask. I only know the few things that we heard from him, because he didn't talk about himself unless he was asked. And even then, he was circumspect. But he did tell me at one point, he told us, that when he arrived in New York and he was sent to RJJ, Rav Yaakov Yosef Yeshiva on Henry Street, he wasn't up to snuff because he only had a Talmud Torah education. He was in public school. So he sat like Rabbi Akiva of old. Rabbi Akiva, I believe, might have sat in preschool or in the youngest grades with his child to learn Torah until gradually, as a Twickled, he developed, etc. My father did the same thing. And I believe that for every ounce of Mesiras Nefesh, this was a yesh kaina olamai b'sha'achas. When he made that decision, he was already on a trajectory. And as I said in other talks, he already was getting b'hakafa. He was already getting credit. A person makes a good decision, he gets credit. Now, I said in the past, he only saw his parents from the time he was 14 until 26 when he was married, approximately twice a year. So we're talking about his father probably only saw him 26 or 27 more times in his life. And his father passed away at 58, within the year after I was born. And my brother, who's a year younger than me, was named after my Zayda. So this is a Mesiras Nefesh. This is a Mesiras Nefesh on the part of a mother who only has two children, and one of them goes off to war, the older brother, 5 years older than my father, and she sends my father to yeshiva. Mothers live for their children, and to send them to such a faraway place for Torah, this is a tremendous Mesiras Nefesh. And this sweat equity, who knows if this wasn't a yesh kind of ilama b'sha'achas for my grandparents as well. So why am I saying this now? I'm saying this because I think it's something that we could all learn from in our individual lives. Do not underestimate the power of the moment. Seize the power of the moment, no matter what your age. You're never too old and you're never too young to seize the power of a moment and to effectuate life-changing pathways. And that's what my father did. My brother, Rebellion Eretz Yisrael, very bright gentleman, and he analyzed what was really going on with my parents. In the 1960s and 1970s, by the way, when I was born, it was within 10 years after the end of the Holocaust. Literally, had I been born 13 or 14 years before, and at a different location, I could have literally been from the young children who survived the Holocaust. That's how close we were. And in America then, the America of the 1950s, where I remember my father getting smicha from Chavetz Chaim Kollel, one of the few Kollel people in the entire couples in the entire United States. I don't know if it numbered 100. I remember vividly the day my mother put up the sign in our Edgemere apartment where we lived because they supported themselves by my father teaching Talmud Torah. I remember the simcha, etc. And a year later, he was appointed principal of Tiferes Moshe Bar Fenech Leibowitz, Kohen Levrocha, who was my sandik, my father's Rebbe. So what was going on here? At that time, most of the day schools that existed, so to speak, in Queens, meaning no disrespect, but the day schools, Dov Revel and Yeshiva Central Queens, were basically modern Orthodox. And they were co-ed, and the levels of religiosity and the comprehensiveness of real durch and durch Torah life, it wasn't there. The women, mostly who sent to those yeshivas, overwhelmingly could understand they didn't wear sheitlach, and their dressing was not the way. They weren't the biggest prutzes maybe, and it was the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, It wasn't. I still remember when my mother wore white gloves. It was a whole different thing. If you look at Queen Elizabeth today, there's a Kana, the way she dresses, that's how all women, including Gentile women, dressed. Now we want so much credit that we have these foolish people who are talking about how tzniistic all of our young people are and everything else is only with rare exceptions. I'm sorry to say, I'm using a strong lesson. They're oblivious, shaitim, and fools. And I say they're fools because they're not fools. Intellectually, they might be brilliant, but they're fooling themselves. Got to look at pictures of Queen Elizabeth. Got to look at pictures what the average non-Jewish Gentile woman looked like. The untightness of her clothing, the length of her clothing, the Naturaydigkeit of her clothing, okay? Which is personified by the wearing of white gloves. And you understand, it was a whole different world. And the tznius has been yored peliployim. But anyhow, so there was the modern Orthodox yeshiva, and then there was so-called the Tervadas of Queens that later was called Or Yisrael by Rabbi Geldseiler, Zechreinu Levrocha, who was the Chasna de Mendesia of the Michtav Eliyahu, and he was a very, very religious, serious, etc., with a long beard. But I don't know if the average people in the city, in Queens, were ready for Or Yisrael, and were able to fully acclimate themselves to that right wing, that tremendous right wing of orthodoxy. Comes along a young, handsome, smiling gentleman, around 6'2", who looked, if I may say so, please, but you can judge for yourself. You see pictures of him in those years. He doesn't look like somebody out of Hollywood. A tremendous, tremendous Shankite. And comes with him a young, vibrant, dynamic, well-spoken, articulate, humorous raconteur, his life's partner, and Eza Kenegdai, my mother. And they come to Queens, and it's brakoi, it's a lightning strike. It's something new. And gradually, a lot of people in Queens, without them trying, without them being preachy, without them talking down, but being echad ha'am, being just by being part of the community and demonstrating a higher standard, but without being pushy. And they were misahev, the brios, and they were given a job assignment, whether they fully understood and comprehended the dynamics or not, or whether we only understand it looking backwards in retrospect. They were sent. I don't know if Henoch Leibowitz understood it probably, and maybe my parents understood it as well. Their job was to show that there could be an American yeshivish type frumkeit, not maybe the yeshivas of Kletsk or Brisk or the comprehensiveness of Lakewood, but that was a bechina of Elef Nichnas ve'echad Yotzei at that time, for sure. My parents showed to gotten to light, and therefore many people were attracted. They were attracted because he was fine, he was easygoing, he was smiley, he was very idealistic. He was not super dynamic, but he was dynamic. He spoke, he had a presence, and he had an ernstkeit about what he was doing, which was infectious and which impacted on people at all levels of life. It impacted on a parent body. And it had a lot to do with how the students at that time and that are now themselves grandparents, and one after the other, they all remember Rabbi Levin and his influence upon them. And he did this for me, he did that for me. And I've heard myself superlative things. A doctor from out of town called me up and he said, I'm frum today, because you go through various nisyonis on your way to being a doctor and maybe in being a doctor. And I'm frum today in measure because of Rabbi Levin. I told him he was being overly complimentary. He came from a family where some of his uncles were stark b'nei Torah and gone l'chesed, and his father made it through the army with frumkeit intact. But nevertheless, there was this perception, and people who even were the sons of Rabbanim in Queens, of Rav in Queens, two of his sons attribute the fact that they've been a Torah dick because they went to yeshiva. My father used to have a relationship. He was several years younger than my father with Rabbi Meir Kahana. I remember at the age of 11 or 10 or 12, around there, at 13, Rabbi Kahana, it was in 67, my father, Rabbi Kahana, sat at the head table. He was a rabbi in Howard Beach, I believe. And this was just as he was starting the JDL. Rabbi Kahana was a very, very idealistic person. And he used to learn a lot, I believe. And Rabbi Kahana was Makarev people in Howard Beach. Where did he send those children? He was Makarev. He developed a shaykhus with my father and a friendship, and he used to send children that he was Makarev to Tiferes Moshe. And that's what Tiferes Moshe was. It was a portal. It was an opening. It was an invitation. It was a pathway towards a more comprehensive upgrading in Yiddishkeit that was not something that was force-fed. It was not something of hell and brimstone. It was something that was geschmack. And I might have mentioned before, I remember my father bought a Norelco tape recorder when tapes, reel-to-reel tapes, as opposed to wires, was a new thing. And he didn't even have a microphone. And he went around holding the tape recorder, playing Yiddish music at the Rosh Chodesh assembly so that all the kids should have a geschmack from the Jewish music. This is the kind of thing that he did. And my mother sublimated all of her various talents. You never heard talk of Gashmias, of upgrading, of Parnassa, of money. It was not a discussion in my house, ki huzeh. And therefore I and my siblings all grew up unpretentious, without putting any significant emphasis whatsoever, not on acquisitions and property, not on money, not on what it could do. And we were never spoiled or impressed that the people who had money and et cetera, we knew from a youngest age that we had something far more important than money. Now, I would like to take this opportunity to learn a Mishnah. The Zeicha Nishmas, my father, Harein Kapos Mishkavai, and the custom is to learn a Mishnah, to learn Mishnayos throughout the Shana, especially in the Shleishim, to have others learn it in the Shiva, and especially the Mishnayos that they learn is Perek Zayin, in addition to all Mishnayos, Perek Zayin and Mikvois, because it has the oasis of Mishnah, Neshama, etc. So, Talmud Torah the Rabbim is saying a Mishnah, especially at night. Night is the time when Moshe Rabbeinu learned Torah Shabbal Peh. There's a specialness to it. And I would like to share the Mishnah. But first, I'd like to just tell you something. We saw the spiritual serendipity when my mother, Harein Kapos Mishkava, Zechron Livrocha, passed away at the very, very conclusion near Shkia of Achron Shel Pesach. She passed away right before the Yontif took leave. Hashem said, "Chasal sid the Pesach kills Chosai." Mrs. Levy, you did the job. Kecholchu Kaisav Mishpatav. We saw it. We saw it in the Chama, in the Shasa Patira. He took her into the hospital to spend Pesach with him. She had the Siddur with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. She had the whole Pesach. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, if I wax a little poetic, he sang to my mother, Alea Shalom Zechron Levrocha, Dayenu, you suffered enough. Mrs. Levin, I'm taking you back. This was on the 39th anniversary of her becoming a grandmother for the first time when my Bechira, Naomi, was born. And on the family Zoom this Sunday, I said, what do you feel? You hear the serendipity about the fact that she passed away on your 39th birthday. So she says to me, what about Zaidi? I said, what about Zaidi? Zaidi passed away 10 days later. It was a very exalted time to pass away. It was Shas Mincha, Shas Raiva Deraiva, the Kabbalistic Lashon for Ratzon of Ratzon. It's the most desirous part of Shabbos for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kabbalistically speaking. And he passed away on something that was not just a Shabbos, but it was also a Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, and Shabbos means Toshev, returning to the roots. Mizmor Shil Yom Shabbos, Tov L'Hodos L'Hashem, Tevel Hoidus, Tevel Isvadis, is Vidu, is Tshuva. Shabbos takes us back to the way originally we were meant to be. Yisnach Moshe Matas Chelkai, he gives us the crowns of Nasav and Nishma temporarily. Again, on Shabbos, we have Neshama Yiseva. It's an exalted time. But more than that, it was also Rish Chodesh. Rish Chodesh is Man Kapara L'chol Taldoisam. It's signal to us, to me certainly, it's a kapara, and homiletically speaking, L'chol Taldoisam, that we're going away of the Tata. It was not only a bechin of kapara to him, but it's a kapara L'chol Taldoisam to the many people of his progeny he was leaving behind, and then some. So what do you mean, Nami? So she says that my father passed away on April 25th, and April 25th, the Yemais HaChama, was also her birthday. That year, Achron Shel Pesach corresponded with April 25th. So it comes out both her grandmother and her grandfather, Yirtzalange Yoren, they both passed away literally on her birthday, and on the Hashlama of 39th years, going into the 40th year. Which also has a profound significance in Yiddishkeit. The 39 malachos, so to speak, the 39 going into the 40th year, the 40 years, etc., and what it represents. So unbelievable. Now, so you say, but that's an English birthday. Let me be honest with you. No, we don't want to put English birth dates on the stones, on the matzevis. It's what I'm saying, not to do that. But remember, the entirety of the birthday, when they put a Hebrew birthday, an English birthday, is a date which represents something which is ultimately anathema, antithetical to Yiddishkeit. By us, it's 5,780. It's not 2020, and that's why we say L'misparim. And we're supposed to try to avoid even writing those dates as much as possible. And when you write those dates on a check or something, I think based on a Sam Seif or something, then imperceptibly you should write very small L'misparim or Lamed Mem Samech in microscopic letters, that you're not reckoning with the secular or religious secular way of reckoning. But in terms of the solar year, that's called in halacha and in Jewish writings, it's called Yemais HaChama. And we see in Ketores that was brought up in the Beis HaMikdash, there was 365 of a certain ingredient. That was of the ingredients Keneged Yemais HaChama. So there is something to be said for the solar year as well. Okay, so the fact that my parents both passed away on the 39th of Hashlama, to me, this was also in the Chama. And this also shows nothing is coincidental and by chance. So let us learn together a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, we know that a Mishnah, that a ritualarium, a mikveh, that the Araisi, you need a mikveh for Tahara, to purify from Tumas Mace and from other impurities. It has to have 40 saw. Yesh, what happens if the mikveh doesn't have natural rainwater that came directly there, not through a keli, not through a keli, which is a receptacle? It's missing a little. You have to be mashlim. You have to fulfill the mikveh to fill it, to get it to 40 saw. So what are you allowed to use? You're not allowed to use what's called shu'oven. There has to be 40 saw that's not shu'oven. It's not water that was drawn out by another receptacle and then poured in. It has to be natural water, like rainwater. Yesh malin es hamikvah. There are certain types of elements that can elevate the mikveh to complete it to the 40 saw. V'loy poislin, and by putting it into the mikveh, they don't invalidate the mikveh. Poislin, there are certain materials, certain liquids that are put into the mikveh. They puzzle, they invalidate the mikveh v'loy malin, and they don't contribute towards getting it to the 40 saw level it has to be on. And there are certain things that are neutral, loy malin, v'loy poislin. They neither invalidate the mikveh nor do they complete it, and it still remains, even if it's a certain volume that goes over 40 saw, it remains as if there's no 40 saw, and it still has to be filled with other liquids. Elu Mylin V'lei Poison. These are the things that, even though they're liquids, their source is liquid, and they were arrived and brought to the mikveh through receptacles, through kalim. Nevertheless, they don't become called shuav and drawn water. Hasheleg, snow, haborod, hail, hakfor, it's sleet, that slushy kind of thing, v'haglid, and ice, v'hamelach, and sea salt, salt from water, salt from the sea, v'hatit hanoruk, and muddied water. Omer Rabbi Akiva said, Hoya Rabbi Yishmael don kenegdi. Rabbi Yishmael disagreed with me. Loiman, he said, Hasheleg, the snow and all of these other frozen types of liquid, Einei Males HaMikvah. They do not contribute to completing a halachic mission, mikvah. However, Ve'eidu Anshe Mediva. However, in practice, Anshe Mediva of that particular city called Mediva, they testified Mishmoi with regard to him, She'omer lehem, that he told them, Su'u, go out, ve'heviu sheleg, and take a lot of snow in receptacles for osu mikvah patchila, and use that snow to make an entire 40 saw of a mikvah. That when you take it and you deposit it into the place that's going to be the mikvah, which is not a separate receptacle itself. It's not a swimming pool. It's rather something that's dug into the ground. And you can actually have the whole thing. Rabbi Yishmael is saying the whole thing. All 40 saw can be, I believe, can be made from snow, sleet, etc., and become a kosher mikveh. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, Evan haborod kemayim. He is makbid that Evan haborod, even if it's frozen hailstones, it's considered like mayim shuavim, and it's not kosher for mikveh. Ketzad mylin v'lei poislin. What does it mean? Above we said the first stage is mylin. It elevates a mikveh to the 40 saw requirement, and it doesn't invalidate the mikveh. If the mikveh is missing one saw from the 40, it requires nafal mehem saw. If a saw worth of a borod or whatever it is, these kinds of items fell into it, it elevates it to a kosher mikveh. Nimsa mylin v'lei poislin. So you see that it completes it and it doesn't validate it. This should be a schus for my father. And in the future weeks, I will try to say Mishnayos as a schus for both of my parents. I'm going to speak a little bit about Pesach Sheni, that tonight is Pesach Sheni. And I would like to say that Rabbi Yair Hoffman, who writes frequently in different media outlets, both Biksav in Flatbush Jewish Journal, at Times, and the Fire, or whatever it's called, Larry Gordon's paper, and his stuff frequently appears either in Matzav or Yeshiva World News or wherever it is on the internet. And I want to say from the outset that I strongly disagree with Rabbi Hoffman and his position having to do with Jewish divorce in Gittin. I have a long-standing disagreement with him. However, as I've said time and again on various occasions, he writes such geschmacka stuff. He's obviously a Talmud Chacham of note with a tremendous Waltenshon and a tremendous Hekef, and he writes tremendous things, chizuk after chizuk. And in the current article, he writes about, from Chedushei Harim, what Pesach Sheni teaches us. By the way, we know the Iker concept of Pesach Sheni, which is tonight and tomorrow, Friday, Shabbos, Erev Shabbos Kodesh. There were people who are ritually impure. We're going from Mikvoyos to speaking about people who are ritually impure, Tomei Mace or whatever, and therefore they couldn't eat from the Korban Pesach. So they came to Moshe, said, Lamin Nigara, why should we be worse? And we want to have also the opportunity to eat from the Korban Pesach. And Moshe says to him, Imdu, you stay here, and I'm going to consult Hashem or whatever Hashem is going to say. And the Svarim speak about it of Gedalia Shor, that through the sweat equity, the ruts and the chuk of Klal Yisrael, they were the trigger. Pesach Sheni shows that symbiotic spiritual relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that we're mashlim his Torah. Hashem bara elikim lases. Hashem created the word lases that we should do not only in the physical sense to advance technologically the world, but more importantly, lases, Torah Shabbat Peh, is lases. And here they with Klal Yisrael went to a more exalted level. Through their desire, they caused that Hashem should be machadish and mitzvah in the Torah of Pesach Sheni. But that's not what Rav Yochanan said, but that's the basis of Pesach Sheni. How far a person can go in his shutfus, in his junior partnership with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in creating timeless new ruchnias, and that Hashem licenses us even for this. But what Rabbi Yochanan basically does is he brings down the Chedushay Harim and he applies it to our situation. The Chedushay Harim was saying if a person was impure, to a certain extent perhaps, the impurity, what is impurity? And I'm flavoring what he says. Rav Gedalia Shor speaks about that. What is impurity? Tumah comes from Tumah's mace, and there is only an impurity because of Misa, and the impurity came around because Chava, the original sin, the cosmic sin of Eitz Hadas, brought death into the world, and therefore there's concomitant impurity with it. So impurity is somewhat associated, at least it's associated with original sin. And maybe in a more broad-based way, I'm suggesting it could possibly be that we're in, so to speak, a sinful state. We haven't yet conquered Misa. We haven't yet conquered immaturity, which we will, La'asid Lavai. So anyhow, what he says is like this: the people who are rechoikim, b'derech rechoika, they were far away. So there's a few reasons. They couldn't do the Korban Pesach because they were on a long distance trip. They couldn't get back in time for the original Pesach. So Lama Nigara, b'derech rechoika. So the Chedushay Rim homiletically, Al-Pidrush says, the derech rechoika was they were far away. They're far away from Yiddishkeit. What's the eitzah if they're far away from Yiddishkeit? The eitzah is the tshuka, the desire deep inside from that part of us inside. The same Chedushay Rim says, Magen Avraham, that there's an Avraham quotient deep inside us that's unsullied and untainted, and that wants to be Ritzaneinu Lasis Ritzoincha, Rakashas to be Isa Ma'akev. The Yetzer Hara inside us prevents us, but deep down HaKadosh Baruch Hu we want. And that came to the fore by Pesach. The Korban Pesach, which separated Ben Yisrael La'amim, between the deities of the secular society, the Eretz Haaretz, the Yetzer Hara, the Satan of the Mitzrayim, and Klal Yisrael's desire to be Avdei Hashem. And therefore Moshe said to them, Imdu, stay, stand. It didn't really mean stay here while I question Hashem. He says, the Chedushay Rim homiletically, Imdu, stand in Lashon of Tefillah. Standing, you stand up to be Rispalal and do tshuva. So Imdu, stand up, daven, and do tshuva. So Rabbi Yochanan, in a very beautiful way, extended that to today's people who need to do tshuva, who need to be drawn close, who need to have that second chance. Those people are, and he says, homiletically, "Ein ba'aseh she'ein bo mes." In other words, today, a light that we know from every single community, from the ultra right wing to the most modern Orthodox, there are people who are dropouts. There are kids who are, so to speak, at least temporarily off the derech. And Rabbi Hoffman says that we have to dedicate our Pesach Sheni and our desires to bring them back into the fold. The concept of Pesach Sheni, of a second chance, etc., etc. So I wanted to share that with you, and that's very, very beautiful concept. And halavai, we should be zeicha that. Rabbi said, the biggest thing I'm afraid of now, I'm telling you, I had to go to a doctor in Manhattan. I'm very careful not to go out because of my age and because of my situation. I'm very careful, but you have to go. So I drove myself my own car because I don't want to go in anybody else's car. I'm afraid with shedding. On the way back, I passed by Avenue J in Flatbush. Avenue J, that until recently, besides a few food stores and pharmacies, everything was locked down and shuttered. All of a sudden, I saw 3.99 type stores, those kinds of stores. They were all open on Avenue J. The hardware stores open, and all of the various food stores. even the ones that weren't open, the takeouts, the pizza shops are open. So it seems that with or without rishus, people, because of the financial difficulties and the needs of the communities, people are, even in New York, which is far behind other states where they've legally opened up things, people in New York are opening up. Now, what am I afraid of? It's gewaldic, we're opening up, we're getting back. First of all, let me tell you like this, the CDC says that they're expecting, chas v'sholem, a good chance of a second wave that might be stronger than the first wave coming with the flu season. We have to bear these things in mind. We have to be concerned, and we have to have trepidation, and we have to be somewhat fearful about this. The second thing is, there's now something that it has the symptoms with children. There was a day or two ago, there was 60 or 64 children already with this called Kawasaki. And they believe that this Kawasaki comes from, it's a side, quote unquote, gift, okay, from the COVID. So the whole time we were being mishtashaya, we were happy that the children are seemingly much, much more immune to it. And now we're seeing that. The third thing is they're talking clear. The scientists have identified that there's a mutation. There's already one major mutation of this Negev. And from the West Coast, it's mutated. One came from China, and from New York coast, it's coming from Europe, and it's two different things. So it's questionable about how much we can depend on a quote unquote a vaccine. But what's the point that I'm making? Hashem is still sending us telltale messages. Many people have seen news reports that have been replayed on the internet and various sites, from sites, about animals coming from outlying places and coming into residential places, all kinds of chayas, monkeys, elephants, a leopard, all kinds of zachen. This is reminiscent of a biblical type plague from the Saras HaMachas. Then we now have something which appeared on Yeshiva World News, that there's a super dangerous type of a hornet. I think it's in Washington, the state of Washington or something. The hornet is like an inch long or something, which is huge, huge size. It's like a monster hornet, and it has a tremendously powerful sting, and it can do a lot of damage. Then we have the tremendous fires that had been going on in Australia and in different parts of the country, in California earlier. It was pushed out of the news. I wonder if these things are still continuing. Then we had recently, around 6 weeks ago, we had in the middle of this Negev, we had tremendous damage that was done by tornadoes in Tennessee. Rabbi said we have to wake up. We're seeing all kinds of things of biblical proportion. And the scariest thing of all is that we should come back. We should get out of this thing, albeit maybe hopefully for good, but if not temporarily. And people are breathing a sigh of relief. And yes, we signed on not to talk in shul. And yes, many people have signed on with the Simcha initiatives, and many people say it doesn't go far enough just to drop it to 250 people, and it doesn't speak enough about cutting down on flowers and cutting down on crazy excesses, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm not getting into this. It is certainly a step in the right direction. Some people say, chutzpah, how dare you even question if these Gedolei Rabbanim, if these distinguished rabbis said something? You have to put your blame on automatic, you're not even allowed to question, which of course is ridiculous on its sense, because it says, if you ask with respect and you suggest there's no reason in Hashem's earth, based on the Torah, that there's no more sha'ala v'yagetcha zikenecha v'yomulach. Yes, there's a concept that yomulach yamin su small yamin, that there is something, but there's something that's more intrinsic and that's less limited, called sha'ala v'yagetcha zikenecha v'yomulach. And there are many times in Yiddish history that effective things have percolated from the bottom up. Okay. And it's truly, if more people would push a more comprehensive type of Simcha initiative that covers all the possible exclusions and escape hatches and escape clauses, it will be for a benefit. This is just parenthetically, but the point is, we still haven't seen leadership telling us very, very stark that kafi, in direct proportion to the tremendous toll that this has taxing toll that this has taken on us in terms of disease, in terms of patiras, in terms of finances, etc., which is unbelievable, that there should be an equal and opposite spiritual reaction of midatayv and meruba to really have a massive communal tshuva in such a way that would be impactful. Unfortunately, I don't see it happening, and I'm scared stiff that olam kamin hagei nohug, and that we're basically going back to the same things, and that would be a tremendous tragedy. That would be a tremendous tragedy. One of the silver linings, if you can say this, with this current terrible matzav is that throughout history we have seen that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yes, for lack of a better word, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does lilkei b'sheshanim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has high demands of Klal Yisrael throughout history. You want to call it the word punishment, you can call it the word punishment. It's part of the Ani Mammons with schar v'onesh. Okay, and the Chazal replete with discussing it. And we had 75-year hiatus, and now Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed us that our generation also is deserving of chaysech, what do you call it? Chaysech shiftei sayin b'nai is somebody who withholds from punishing his children to discipline. I should say discipline is a better word than punishment. It's not punishment to punish, it's discipline. So there's a machlokes going on now. Okay, so in other words, the silver lining is that Hashem reckons with us, that we're dear to Him. We're His dear children, and He wants to see that we should improve, and He wants to find ways of assuring our survival, and He does that with Lilka B'Sheshanim. This is not the time for a major discussion of this. I'm just speaking in an abbreviated way, but this is the hashkafa, timeless hashkafa of the Chazal. There's a big machlokes. Rabbi, I don't know how we could sleep at night. There's a machlokes. Rav Gershon Edelstein, who's considered one of the Koi Gedolim with the senior Ziknei Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael, and is acknowledged as Saspe America. So it comes out he's one of the leading Gedolim of the world in Zikanim, along with Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Rav Gershon Edelstein put out a video to explain why Haredim are getting it in greater proportion than the irreligious in Eretz Yisrael and in other areas. And he basically comes out and uses a concept that Hashem holds us to a higher standard with the Marines, so you want to call it discipline or punishment in a Talmudic way. But he has a bar palukta. He has that great Minnesotan, tremendous person of biblical proportions, Manis Friedman, and Manis Friedman keeps on going more and more. It's not a punishment. It's not a punishment. It's this, it's that. We can't assume that Hashem would be so terrible. He didn't talk to us for 2,000 years since He last talked to us, and we're still hewing and adhering to so much of His Torah. He has tightness on us, etc., etc. So we have a choice now. We're faced with a stark choice. We have to decide who we're going to listen to, Gershon Edelstein or the great Chabadska, that none of the people in Chabad come to clean up the mess that their Frankenstein is making. And frankly, it's sad that no other Gedol Yisrael from other Christ, no other Rabbonim, no other Hashkafistas come and speak out against him. And he has maybe 10 of these kinds of videos. So 11, who cares? Why do we care? We're not Gerson. You're not Gerson, but we have Arvis and Klal Yisrael. We're all connected. And if you look at his hits, he can have 10,000 hits. He can have 20 or 50,000 hits for stuff that he's saying that's blasphemous. And he keeps on digging himself in because, I'm sorry to say, it must be his gaiva. He's misguided. I don't say he's a Russia. I'm sure he's been macabre a lot of people. And he has a tremendous charisma and personality. But Agav Churva Shabesta, he's making terrible mistakes. He's going deeper and deeper. And I got a call from a young man who some of the things he was saying, this is a time that you can spend more time with your family, and you can get to know, and you can be more comprehensive, and you can develop a big relationship with Hashem. And because he cloaks things in beautiful, poetic, positive types of terminology, so he slips in the ores, the snake's venom, he slips it in. And people think he's correct in this, and maybe he's correct in that. And it's important they should be able to bifurcate and understand this. Okay, we have to be able to understand what he says it's effective or what not. So it's a very scary thing. And I want to very much make a public macha, because Kemat nobody else is making a macha. There is a rabbi on the internet who does make a macha. I became a friend of his, but his name slips my mind. And he does speak out against it, but largely they're not, and it's a terrible thing. I want to say in the remaining few minutes, what can we do for our niftarim? One of the things we do is benching. Benching with zimun, leading a zimun is a very big thing. The second thing is, as much as possible, to try to get the Haftarah and to say the Berachos of Haftarah. These are things that are brought down. These are top important things. The third thing, of course, is to learn Mishnayos and Neshama on a daily basis. The fourth thing is to say Tehillim. You're driving in the car, you're walking the street, everybody knows Kapitel of Tehillim by heart. Say the Esayinei Laharim, say Mimamakim, say Maskil David, say Lam Netzech Mizvul David, say Mizvul Soida, and say it has to be donor directed. Say, I'm doing these things, L'Zeichel Le'ili Nishmas, for so and so, for so and so, for all of Klal Yisrael, for all of the Niftarim. We can do Chesed Shalemus before I daven 3 times a day, because that's a good time to give tzedakah. You're supposed to give tzedakah for yourself, but tzedek it clears the pathways of your tefillah from makatrigim, and I give it, so I give like $1. So I give a quarter for myself, that my tefillah should go up. I give a quarter for my father, and I say his name, and my mother, and I say her name. And I give another quarter for Refuah Shalema, for all the cholim, and also l'zeichel nishmas, le'ilin nishmas, all the niftarim. And if we do this 3 times a day, we're helping. We could be helping individuals, and we could be helping with Klal Yisrael. The next thing is a gemach. The Chavetz Chaim says that one of the second most important thing you can do after, I guess, learning Torah, it's even bigger than Kaddish, whatever it is to put a gemach, because a gemach is in perpetuity mitzvahs. And I'm happy. And my father's and mother's savah, they asked to leave over a gemach, and that from whatever was left, they wanted a Maisa should go to a gemach in their name, which is very important, very beautiful. And if people have who departed suddenly and they didn't make those requests, you should know the biggest thing that you can do besides learning Torah is to make gemachs, because then the money keeps on turning over, and in perpetuity, it is a schus for niftarim. There are other things to do that we will speak about in the. I want to say something else. When we daven, in Kavanah by davening, there's places where we can think about our parents or our dearly departed. When we say Elikeinu v'Elikei Aviseinu, and then we describe Elikei Avram, Elikei Yitzchak, Elikei Yaakov. So if those are the Ovis, Ein Nikra Ovis Elishloisha. So what's Elikei Aviseinu? We're repeating it twice. We have to define to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not Tefillah, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So there are Mefarshim that say Elikeinu v'Elikei Aviseinu, that we relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because he was the God of our fathers, because we realize the relationship and the chesed that he did to our forebears, that obviously includes our parents. So a person who's with Tadach Hashana, and maybe for the rest of his life, for his parents, when he says Elikeinu v'Elikei Aviseinu, he could think about all the spiritual hatava that Kodesh Baruch Hu did with his or her parents, and be appreciative of that. And then we work our way backwards from our forefathers, our grandfathers, and our great-grandfathers, all the way to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Another place we could have in mind is by Ritzei. It says, V'ishe Yisrael utfilasam. V'ishe Yisrael means the fire offerings of the karbonos. And the Svarim say there's a medrash or a chazal or zoyer, whatever it is, that the malach, one of the malachim, I forget which one, is it Mechoel, he, so to speak, shechts under his beach, the neshamas of the Erlich people, and it's some kind of a carbon to Hashem in a spiritual sense. Does that mean, what does he do? It means he's taking the neshama and he's slitting the throats under his beach. So there are other mefarshim that say the concept of carbon is the concept of hiskarvus, of getting close to Hashem. The Isha Yisrael is, we can understand that Hashem takes the neshamas of all the tzaddikim who are going up, all the Erlich people, and they are zoicha that they should be a carbon, meaning a hiskarvus with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They draw even closer, and they make schusim for all those I believe for all those they left behind, their families, and for their greatness. It could be for their block, for their city, for the country, for the world. So that's another place where we can think about our parents or our departed by V'isha Yisrael, and then Al Chayenu Masur Yadecha. I believe, when we think of we think about our own lives. We can think about the lives of our wives and our children and our husbands and our children and our grandchildren. And we can also think that we thank God for the lives of the parents that we had and what they did for us. Those who were departed, our spouses or whatever it is, were departed. So there's opportunities to commemorate and memorialize these people in our tefillas as well. Ma'ariv Rabbeisai. The terrible thing, I just want to be moicha, that Israel has recently approved a channel for Christian missionaries. With all the stuff that's going on, they wake up, they have to have a channel for Christian missionaries to mamish bring down Yidden. It's a terrible thing. We have to figure out ways of protesting this. This is outrageous. We have to demand of the religious parties in the coalition with Netanyahu, they got to say that this is a no-go, that this is absolutely outrageous. By the way, the senior clergyman, evangelical clergyman, who's now in his 90s, Pat Robertson, who said by 9/11, he said it was in part because of the schmutz of the deviants and the abortions, the baby killing. He's at it again, and he says it. He's not concerned with people making chayzik of disparaging him. And it's a chiyuv on us, chachma b'gam timing, that we also have to speak out. That's not the sole purpose. Hashem multitasks. But certainly Hashem is not zufrieden with the deviants that caused the mabul and the ritzicha. This is Yehud 11. Until we meet again, a guten Tamid.